system unfolding. Military science fiction podcast. Untold stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast.
Well, hey, how's everybody doing? Today we're going to get into the weeds a little bit, maybe talking more to our writer friends, but also to anybody I think that's curious about how just if you're thinking about being a writer or thinking about really kind of anything where you're working with the public and doing something creative, what does professionalism look like? And this is a job, like you're doing something creative, but it's also a job. And you're also thinking about your future, about people you connect with. And one of the things that's been a big lesson for me, and Jeff, I don't know if it's similar for you, but publication, like really like consistent publication that I could depend on. I'd had stuff published through slush piles in my career and I worked as a reporter, but it really wasn't until I started networking and meeting people and people getting to know me and trusting me that the contracts started coming in. And I would like to think a lot of that came from the way I am and carrying myself. But that's been a big lesson. And I think it's something that is sometimes hard to balance in today's world where it seems like the only way you can get traction is to be as wild as possible on social media and maintain the engagement, which is one thing about followers. But when it comes to contracts and business, it's different. So,
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah, what do you think about that?
a big part of this job, James, is getting contracts and getting work. And yeah, selling your book. Obviously, you want people to read your book, but you want the right people to read your book. And I especially feel like my wife, who runs Vivid Covers, she wrote a whole book about how to deal with your cover artists. And there's like a huge section on professionalism. And she even like writes emails in the book, and she tells people cut and paste these emails when you're interacting with your cover designer because it'll make sense to them and it'll make you look good. The last thing you want as an author when you're presenting yourself to the public, either as a self-published author, which I was, and I'm pretty sure you were too at one time, or as independently published, or as a small press published author, which we both are too. The last thing you want is to present yourself to the public in such a way that people look at you and go like, "Oh, I don't want to read that guy's stuff. He's a lunatic, or he's
Unless they're curious, like, can
whiny, or
sense?
yeah."
Yeah.
I mean, there are worse things than being considered a lunatic or fringe. Like we all have author friends who are really popular, and some people would call them crazy. But the thing that you don't want to be is seen as whiny or entitled or self-important or any of that. And trying to behave professionally, even if you like are really outspoken for a cause, whatever cause that may be, behaving in a professional manner will gain you more traction for your cause than, flying off the handle as, a crazy person who whines about everything. I'm going to give you a great example on Twitter this week. I'm not going to name any names, but on Twitter this week, an author came on and said, at Twitter X,
What's
it's just weird calling it X.
I'm still not used to it, but
What are your tweets?
we all know
X's?
what it is.
Um, I mean, I use it a lot, and I'm fully on board with it being X. I always think of it as Twitter still. She came on and she was like, "Would one for F's sake, would one of my 37,000 followers please review my book?" And there's a lot to dissect in that statement. For one, and this may be newsflash to some authors, and I know there will be authors who are like, "Oh, that's not true." Reviews do not and never have sold books. They just don't. You get reviews because people bought your book, liked it enough to leave a review. And only about 1% of people who buy books leave reviews. So, and I know this because you can look at the numbers of books sold versus the numbers of books, the number of reviews you have. Now, Amazon's made this a little bit easier of late with the ratings, where you don't have to leave a review, you can just hit ratings. But the numbers still hold true. You sell X amount of books, you're going to get X amount of reviews. No amount of begging or whining or complaining is going to change that. In fact, it's going to hurt you. So the professional way, if you've released a book and it's your pride and joy and nobody has bought it, you don't go out and say, "Please review my book." you advertise your book in a way that makes it palatable to the people who would be the ones who would be likely to leave a
That kind of
review.
book. So, I mean, touch on that. We should expand on why it hurts you because I think a lot of people don't realize how Amazon works in that way. If Amazon, Amazon's a primary market, whereas I think we repeat this a lot, but Amazon is where most books are sold nowadays. So that's why we
The
talk
number
about it,
one and the number two bookstore.
right? But Amazon, when you talk about the what the algorithm is or what the algorithm is trying to figure out, Amazon is trying to figure out how to sell a product. And so if someone comes to the page, it's trying to figure out where they came from, what the profile is, if they have, tidbits across Amazon and what they previously bought. And then did they buy it or did they not? And if they didn't buy it, then that gets lower weighted. But if it's someone that comes in that has never bought anything, for us that's in military science fiction or even adjacent science fiction category, and they buy it, it's not giving Amazon good information because ideally Amazon gets this good information and then it wants to sell the product. So it's going to get to a point where it's trying to push it to other people. And yes, a lot of this has become like very advertising based. Like you're gonna, you're still gonna have to, depending on what the book is, you're advertising it, you're bidding on the advertising so that you get placement on other pages and your book comes up higher in search or any product, I should say. But ultimately, the baseline is it's still trying to figure out how to sell the product. And so if you're on a very generic, a general platform like X or whatever, where anybody can see that tweet or that tweet goes viral and that draws me to your page because I'm just curious who this person is that's writing stuff like this. I'm feeding Amazon a bunch of garbage information about how to sell that product. And so you're not helping yourself if you're not aiming at the people that are the audience you're trying to reach. So it's hard. I mean, I think that some people will look at that and say, well, we're talking about this person and maybe they're, you know,
No press is bad press kind
yeah,
of
exactly.
idea. Yeah.
But when it comes to and the other thing, it's like something Steve Ballyer says quite often, like, once you kind of poison an author name, it can be very difficult to build back out of that. If Amazon has weighted that name, it's a game system. If it's weighted it lower, you've got to dig your way out of that negative character attribute to be even be able to level up, right?
Every time you launch a book and it doesn't sell, that's weight against you.
Right.
And every time you launch a book and it does sell, that's weight in your favor. How much weight, we don't know. And that's sausage stuff, and we're not privy to that, unfortunately. I wish we were, but then it would make it too easy to game the system, which surprisingly is a lot of what Amazon does when they make changes is keeping people from gaming the system.
Mhm.
The So this author in particular made this big statement on Twitter. It blew up, it went viral. Thousands of people saw it, responded to it, and predictably what happened was that she got a bunch of one-star bombs. Now, whether they're real reviews or not, I don't know. If you can look at the sales numbers of the book, and you can see, like, if you look at the sales ranking of the book, and if it's ranked in 100,000 range, it hasn't sold a book in 24 hours at least. So if someone got a bunch of reviews in the last 24 hours, but the sales ranking hasn't changed, it's probably a review bomb. If the sales ranking has changed, then their book sucks. I think for her, I think it was probably just people going in reviewing a book they hadn't bought because they thought she sounded like a whiny, entitled person, which she did. And yeah, it's frustrating when your book doesn't sell. Both of us, every author I know, with the exception of a handful of people, have dealt with the frustration of launching a book and having it not sell. And that's just part of the business. But
Right.
what you don't do is whine about it on social media. And that's really, really important because after you're talking about poisoning the well at Amazon, you're poisoning the well with people on social media. All you'll be known after that is the whiny author. And that author had 37,000 followers, and nobody was buying her book. And you could say, well, maybe they hadn't gotten around to it yet, or maybe a lot of her followers were bots. A couple of years ago, there was that author, I forget her name, but she was like the cyborg author or something. She got really big on YouTube. We had like 100,000 followers.
Mhm.
Launched a sci-fi novel. It was a romance novel, but it had sci-fi elements in it. She called it a sci-fi novel. And on Amazon, anyways, it bombed. It didn't do good at all. Has 100,000 followers on YouTube. Now, maybe she sold it successfully through other avenues. I don't know. But on Amazon, no, not at all.
And that's the argument about engagement versus that follower count and what that actually does for you. It's two separate audiences. I think a lot of times that's what authors, at least in our business, fail to realize is that, and I'm not good at this, I'm not good at getting followers on social media. I just have accepted this fact about myself, but I do sell books on Amazon, and actually the social media, aside from making professional connections, very few, I interact with very few readers through that. Mostly it's email, and now Discord and things like that. So those are two different things. Like you might have 37,000 followers and you're very successful on Twitter or Instagram or wherever, and you're really good at putting together posts that get people to, interact and follow that. But to get them to make that buying decision and click over to Amazon, that's a really heavy lift that a lot of people don't realize. Like that's why the advertising on Amazon can be so effective, and they have really I think Amazon is now, at least they were the third, if not now the second largest advertising platform, because that's where people are and they're primed to buy. If somebody's in a Kindle and they just finished one book, and that's why that having that next book available is so powerful. That's what's going to get you those sales as an author. But one thing I do want to touch on is sometimes I think there's a misunderstanding as well because, like, say you get a traditional deal, and the publishers that we work with, like, obviously Athon would love it if we had a large social media following. Um, a lot of writers I know were when they would query an agent or query a publisher, one of the questions that would come up with would be to ask, how many followers do you have on any given platform? As if that was part of what was going to get you that deal. But they're doing the same thing. Like in that case, you have a publisher that probably not, but maybe has a marketing department to help you sell that book. They're trying to leverage you as advertising, as kind of that funnel that's going to get people into the place where they have a different buying platform. You know, it's probably only Barnes and Noble at this point, or maybe small bookstores. But in that case, you might activate a certain kind of buyer from TikTok, Book Talk or things like that, that will go seek out the book in a small bookstore. But that's a very small segment, and it tends to only be I mean, I hate to, because every time as soon as we say this, like some other book will pop up and change it. But I think about most recently we've
It's an ever changing.
exactly.
It's why you have to stay on top of it. But there are some things that are, I don't want to say universally true, but they are true pretty much since I've started doing this.
Most
And
people, that's
yeah,
the thing. There's always going to be one or two people that will break the mold and crack the code on whatever new social media platform comes out. But for most people, most writers, and I think, one of the things that I try to emphasize too is that we are kind of we have been in a golden age for I think it was mid-listers. Like so many writers I know that were what we'd consider mid-listers that were maybe making a living, in the 90s to 2000s. As publishers started dropping those because they were focusing more on the big sale authors, if those writers didn't transition to the Amazon marketplace, they really struggled. But then a lot of writers that learned how to work in this new kind of marketplace and paradigm have done very, very well consistently because they can go direct to that audience and maybe they don't have to sell as many books, but they make more money. So it's definitely changed that way. And it's a good place to be if you find that audience that wants to buy the book and you give them what they want. And you also don't, piss them off with something that's because you can also poison an audience against you. So
and different kinds of audiences are in different social media things. Like,
yeah.
the joke about Facebook is it's only for old people. Well, I got a lot of sales from Facebook when I first started out, and I probably still do. I'm just not there as much as I used to be because it's difficult to be on places that are toxic
Well,
like
and
Facebook.
that's part of it too, is I think the social media platforms want you to be you. They want to sell to you. They don't like the idea that like I have a professional platform where I present myself as an author and I'm not really going to talk about like my personal life that much. I don't like to do that. And I also don't I don't know. There are certain, we just live in a time where it's so easy to divide people and you don't like the color red, so I don't like you anymore. Um, I just really don't want to get into that. I'd like to talk about science fiction and the things that, they're basic things that, um, I don't know. I would just really focus on that. And especially when it comes to selling a book and talking to somebody, like we're here to talk about science fiction. We're not here to talk about other things.
And
So
it's funny because I watched over the years as all the platforms did this. Like at first it was like, oh hey, get an author page,
right,
and you create an author persona, an author account like a professional author. And then all of a sudden Facebook's like, well, we're not going to show any of your posts to any people who follow your page unless you pay us.
right,
And for a while, the little boosted post thing on Facebook worked great. And then it was, okay, now get a group. And then they did the same thing with groups. And now it's just, I finally gave up on my author Facebook page and just use my regular Facebook page. And the most success I've had is with a group that was created by fans that I had nothing to do with the creation of. And Twitter's kind of the same way. There's communities on Twitter that you can be a part of, but there aren't communities of readers on Twitter. There's just people, and like there's author communities and there's job communities. And so the thing you want to be careful with when you're posting on any social media is you're going to attract the kind of people who you want to attract the kind of people who are going to want to read your book. And they need to be able to know that they're going to want to read your book at a glance. Because like you said, getting someone to click on a link anywhere is difficult. And the more they have to click on or do, the less likely they're going to be able to do it. I think I read somewhere once where it was 2 clicks is what you get. You get 2 clicks. A click to the Amazon page and a click to the buy button. And if there's anything else in between there, you're done. And that's why those like universal links don't really work that great, where you click someplace and you go to a landing page and then you have to click on another thing to go to the platform you want. Nobody wants that. And while there are people who sell books on Apple and there are people who sell books on Kobo and well, Barnes and Noble and things like that, they are minuscule compared to the people who sell books on Amazon. Like when I say minuscule, I mean like 90% of all books are sold on Amazon, either through Amazon or through Kindle Unlimited. And then you got Apple's number two, and Kobo and Barnes and Noble online are nothing compared to that. So if you go on Twitter and you're super whiny and complainy and you're just unpleasant, you're not going to attract people who are going to want to read your book. If you go on Twitter and you're like, for me, like I talk about like military sci-fi, I talk about the military, I talk about science fiction. I do talk about current events. There's things that I'm very passionate about. And if you look at my book, you'll know instantly whether you want to read it or not, because I have a brilliant cover designer. And she's not at all in the room. And but she is a brilliant cover designer. And it's important, like this is how this holistic system works. This is how this all works, is you get people at a glance to know whether they want to buy your book or not. And if their first interaction with you is, why won't anybody review my book? Or why won't anybody buy my book? Well, guess what? You're not entitled to reviews. You're not entitled to good reviews. You're also not entitled to bad reviews. You're not entitled to reviews at all. For
you're also
me,
setting up the wrong question for people. Like you're
yeah,
bringing people to your book not to love it, but to kind of tell you why they hate it, you know?
yeah.
So,
And you want to invite people in who are going to like it,
right.
not just everybody. Because like when I was first starting out back in 2017, I had this idea that if I could just get enough people to read the book, that it would explode because they would all love it, right? Because none of us write badly. And if enough people read it, it didn't matter if they read that genre or whatever. Enough people read it, I would make enough money, et cetera, et cetera. That's not how it works. One person who reads your book because they like the cover and they like the blurb and they like the first page is worth 10 people who don't click on a link, who don't even read your genre, you know? So when you're spamming your books everywhere, that's what happens is nobody's reading it. Nobody's clicking on it. And all you get is this sort of reputation for being gimmicky or unpleasant and when you're those things, nobody approaches you about contracts. And while you can make a lot of money self-publishing, the vast majority of my income over the last 10 years has come from my Athon contract. So I wouldn't have gotten that if they had looked me up online and been like, "Oh, this guy's a tool. I don't want to work with him." And it's both good and bad. Everybody wants to be who they are. You want to be yourself. You want to be authentic. You don't want to be too authentic. You
Well,
don't
I
want
don't
to
want to be
be too
pigeonholed
open.
towards one thing or another. It's even, I mean, I am a veteran. I am a person that likes, I mean, I don't, all the things that I guess I write about are who I am. Um, but I don't like to, like, if a person's like on one side of a political spectrum or another, or I'm from Oregon. I don't want to just be seen as an Oregon author. I don't want to be just be seen as like those are the only things that I try not to get pigeonholed as, because that does feel like while you might have a certain amount of success with a small audience, you're really locking yourself into that audience that may not be growing. And that can be something I see people do as well, because they think that, I mean, that's something social media is leading us to do, like to further fragment your audience, and you might get better engagement with those smaller people, but it's fewer people and even harder
Yeah.
people to write.
And do they even like what you're writing?
Right.
We write science fiction, and so the first thing I ever ask when people say, "Oh, you're a writer. What do you write?" I'm like, "Well, do you like science fiction?" And if the answer is no, then my response is always like, "Well, then you won't like what I write." So, but yeah, I'm a writer. If someone doesn't like science fiction, don't try to sell them science fiction. If they don't like fantasy, don't try to sell them fantasy. If they don't like reading, don't try to sell them books. We have a buddy,
Teach them
Scott
to
Moon.
read.
Yeah, you got to read. You got to want to read, right? And Scott Moon has that Tall Boys series, which is awesome. We should have him on at some point. And he did a video ad for it. And what happened? It like crashed and burned because people thought he was advertising a movie or TV
Mhm.
show, not a book. You cannot mislead your audience, and that's part of like, you know, I feel like there's a couple of authors who have really big personalities, and Larry knows that he has a big personality, so I don't feel bad about using Larry Correa as an example. Larry's awesome. He's one of the best people I have ever met. Online, he is very bombastic and he's big. He's a big man, but he's got a big personality online. And I think a lot of authors see that and go, I want to be like Larry Correa because obviously he has all of these sales and fans because of his online presence. But that's not true at all. His online presence is as big as it is because he has all of the sales and fans. He didn't create an online presence and then sell books.
Right.
He sold books. People who liked his books came to him to see his online presence.
I mean, I was
If
going to say like two ends of that spectrum, like Larry
Yeah,
on this side and John Scalzi on this side.
yeah, right.
And they're not, I don't think
Do
they're,
people seek out John Scalzi online? I've never seen him
I
online.
don't know. It seems like quite often he's doing things that just go viral all the time. Like they both seem to be good at that, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I guess that's why I think of him as I mean, I don't seek out hardly anybody in social media, but um, and honestly, I don't know how he got like that contract he got with Tor, which was like one of the biggest in science fiction.
It
And I
was a
don't think
while ago too, but it was it
anybody's
10
gotten
books
that.
for $13 million?
Yeah,
Just crazy.
and no, I don't think anybody's getting anything like that again. So
No.
trying to compare yourself to that, or I think just bringing them up as good examples, because if they might be the most visible on social media and it seems like they've got a big following, how much of that is converting? I really wonder
Yeah.
that.
And Larry's followers are pretty great. I mean, they're all good people, it seems like. He's mentioned me a few times in his posts, and that always generates some sales. I know he's done that for Rick and Lisa LL Richmond. But the thing you have to remember is that and that's awesome if somebody can do that. But again, it goes back to you want to attract the people who want to read your book.
Mhm.
You don't want to attract just anybody because you don't want just anybody finding your book. And I know that sounds like all the authors are like, "Oh no, that's not true. You want everybody to read your book." But that's just not the case. You want people who want to read your book. And if you don't know who those people are, you need to figure it out because otherwise you're never going to be successful. You can't just write books and hope they succeed because you put your heart and soul into them. And we do put our heart and soul into our books. But we put our heart and soul into our books and we know the kind of reader who will read them and what other books they like to read. So we know who to talk to. We know how to present ourselves. Now, I know a lot of romance authors they do a lot of drama online, and I think that's probably part of their brand.
Right.
And I know romance is really well on TikTok, but newsflash, nobody else does. Nobody but romance and romantasy does well on TikTok. If you see a woman talking about selling books on TikTok or Facebook or any other platform and they're a romance author, you can immediately, and you're not a romance author, you can immediately just stop listening because it's only relevant to romance authors. There are things that are relevant to everybody. Write a good book, have a correct cover for your genre, attract the right audience. That's relevant to everybody. But there are things that are relevant only to your genre. If I went into a room full of women who were under 30 and tried to pitch them my male sci-fi book, I don't think I would get any sales. But if I did the same thing and pitched them a romance novel, I'd get tons of sales. So it's just about knowing your audience and knowing who you're writing for. And that doesn't mean I don't have female readers. I do. And it doesn't mean I don't have, male readers who don't like my books. Plenty. It just means that that's not my audience. And you should never try to sell your book to an audience that's not yours. Don't try to convert an audience. Just find your audience.
It's
Act
just it's a hard
professional.
one. And I think that's when you've only got so many resources and so much time. And also the platforms are working against you. Like I would love to walk into that room and pull in a women veteran or whatever to read something I write. But the platforms are making it so hard to reach people in an authentic way because they're just constantly segmenting everybody that it's just hard. I think you got to focus on what you can do and what you have time to do. And the other thing about being professional is actually it helps you leverage. I don't even want to say leverage. So I don't like the idea of like using people, but if people like you, they want to help you. Um,
Yeah.
and that's I feel like that is pretty universal in general. Like you might run across a few people that, are just out for themselves, but in this community, most of the people that I've met are it's not a zero-sum
Very
game.
giving. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could maybe feel like, okay, if I promote or say how much I love this person's work, maybe that's not going to equal a sale for me. Most likely not. Like, I don't know. I mean, the readers that love what we do are reading a lot or reading multiple. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
not, it's
I don't
just,
have any, I'm not a, what's her face who wrote Harry Potter. I don't have anybody who just reads my mill sci-fi books and nobody else's.
right.
Right? That's a luxury that traditional published authors have where they have readers who just read their books and they don't read anything else. No, we have readers who read everything that comes out in mill sci-fi, and they're also our readers.
Mhm.
And that's a really important distinction. And you don't want to piss off those readers. You don't want to write crap, that makes them feel like they've been duped.
Right.
And you also don't want to talk badly about them or whine about your readers not leaving reviews or whine about how you're not getting any sales. Again, it sucks. We all know. But you take that and you put it down there and you never let it out. And
I also feel like I'm trying to remember the last time I got prompted to leave a review, I think on Audible. And it was on my phone. I was doing something else. Like I had just finished the book. I can't deal with that right now, And so that's the thing I try to remember too. Like these platforms are pushing people, review, review, review. And it could also be hitting somebody like maybe have good feelings about you, but they're driving, and then like that prompt pops up. They don't have time to deal with that. And then who has time to go back? Like the bane of my life is I get a text while I'm doing something else. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to contact that person, and then I just don't, get
face it. Yeah.
and
I'm that person you didn't contact, by the way. I've texted you so much.
I feel bad. I'm sorry. Um, my
But
foot
no, no,
actually,
you're right. You're right. Dave Chesson, who does Publisher Rocket and Atticus, brilliant guy, awesome guy, submariner. I think he did naval intelligence on submarines.
Mhm.
I might be wrong, Dave. I apologize if I am. I know he was on submarines.
He was in
I'm
the Air
pretty sure
Force.
it was naval
I thought
intelligence.
Cheston was in the Air Force.
I'm
Now we got to find
90%
out.
sure he was in the Navy.
Now we got to find out.
Now we gotta find out. But he once told me we were talking about like marketing, passive marketing is what I call it. It's passive marketing is your cover, your blurb, things like that. And he was saying is you don't know what the person. Oh, gosh, I completely screwed this up. It wasn't Dave Chestnut, it was Brian Cohen. I apologize, Dave. You are brilliant. But no, Brian Cohen told me this, which was you don't know what people are doing when they're reading your blurb. I always have a kid screaming in the background, which you may or may not have heard. And so when I get to the end of a blurb, if it doesn't say buy now and join the fight to save humanity or whatever, if there isn't a call to action for me to click that buy button right now, I might have every intention of buying it now. but then I get called away after I'm done reading the blurb, and then I forget. And then I come back and I close my window. I don't even look at the page again. What Dave Chesson told me that was brilliant is that your cover and your blurb are the only thing that sells books. Nothing else. People don't read reviews. They don't do the look inside. They read the cover. They read the blurb. Look at the cover. Click on the cover. They read the blurb. If they like the blurb, they buy the book. If they like the blurb, it better say buy now at the bottom of the blurb to remind them to buy it now. Otherwise, like you said, they might be about running out the door or whatever. And reviews are the same way. You get prompted at the end of a book to leave a review, but you got a million things going on and you want to process the book that you just read, stuff like that. So what's more important to focus on as an author is writing a good book, having the cover that tells people this is the book they want, having a blurb that tells them to buy the book. And then when you post the stuff online, do it as sort of like, hey, here's my book. It's about this. If you like these things, you like this book. And if you do like it, please leave a review. And that's the most you should ever do when it comes to asking people for reviews. Something we didn't touch on is also you got to be careful with Amazon. They get real finicky about asking for reviews.
Yeah.
They will drop the ban hammer on you so hard, and you will never get back on the platform ever. And nobody thinks it can happen to them until every year in June when like 30 or 40 authors get banned like annually. And then everybody freaks out and behaves for 6 months, and then they start misbehaving again. But so you want to be real careful about asking for reviews. Sales, no problem. Ask for sales all you want. Be very careful about how you ask for reviews.
And quite often, these are people that either bought some kind of service for reviews or leverage, they did leverage without complaining about it, or social media in some way, or gave things away. That's the thing Amazon really does not like, is if you're giving away products. I mean, this
That
it's
used to be a thing. Yeah.
yeah, it's been a long time since this happened, but people would put, a link at the end of a book where you could join a giveaway or something, and they really don't like that. And that's just kind of stupid. So Dave was in the Navy. I was wrong. He was says he was on subs. So I,
Ah, I knew it.
I stand corrected. Um,
You should stand corrected. No. And yeah, Dave Chesson and Brian Cohen, geniuses in their respective fields. There is no better advertiser or marketer than Brian Cohen. His book about writing blurbs, writing sizzling synopsises is the name of the book. Fantastic. I follow that book every single time I write a blurb. I like to think my blurbs are pretty good. I write blurbs for other people who think they're pretty good. And then Dave's knowledge of the science of marketing and how people operate in everything is just really great. And he's got Publisher Rocket and Atticus and a few other things going on. So, he's got an amazing blog. It's called Self-Published Author, Indie Author, something like that. Just type in Dave Chesson or Publisher Rocket and you'll find his webpage
okay, Publisher Rocket.
full of amazing and useful information for being an author. And there's no such thing as too much solid information. Just learn all you can learn and listen to people when they talk about what their experiences are and how they succeeded. But just remember the actual tactical aspect of succeeding. Oh, I wrote in this genre, or I wrote in this perspective, or I wrote this kind of story. That changes month to month, if not hour to hour. You want to stick to stuff that's a little bit more universal, like I write every day. I know who my audience is. I'm writing in a genre that's large, that it has a hungry audience. That's really important. Chris Fox used to talk about having a hungry audience. But all of that is for naught if you go online and act like an idiot and ruin your persona, so to speak, for everybody, especially other authors. Because the sad part is the author community is very giving, but it's also can be very unforgiving. And if you do stuff that pisses off a bunch of authors, you might be in trouble. So, don't do that either.
Screenshots are forever.
Yeah.
And we're talking about stuff that's online, but I was just thinking as well about, you know, um, conventions and things that people do, like don't get drunk. And I mean, drinking can be a big part of, the bar con that happens, and just being really, I don't know, like you never know how somebody's going to take something in person. And I mean, I think part of that whole scene is that it's really fun to be in a place with people that love something and talk to them. But
You get all hyped.
yeah, the things I'm thinking more of that have really turned people off is when people get drunk and get handsy, or it's
Mostly guys.
probably
Though
not
I've had a couple of women,
yeah.
knowing I'm married, come to me and be all a little handsy, and I'd be like, whoa, because like never, if you're a married guy, never go anywhere alone at a con if you can help it, just to avoid any chance of that. Um, but yeah, I think we both know stories of guy male authors who got a little handsy at a con, and that's the end of their career. I know a couple of female authors who said some things about their process that they probably shouldn't have, that made it seem like they weren't actually writing their books that kind of ended their careers. I know I wasn't there for it, but I remember someone telling me that at one of the original 20 books, there was someone on stage talking about how she was writing 20,000 words an hour. And then when they corrected her and said, "You mean 2,000 words an hour?" She doubled down on her 20,000 words an hour thing.
Right.
And that ended up blowing up and wrecking her career. And, so, I mean, obviously, if you're doing stuff that's below board, you want to be extra careful what you say at a con. But even if you're all completely above board, you can still put your foot in your mouth, and I'm famous for this, and screw things up. And if I've ever met you at a con and I said something stupid, please forgive me. I get excited, and like a dog with a bone, I'm just like, and I'm an extrovert in a business with 99% introverts. And so I go to cons and I'm like, people, I get to talk to them. So yeah, you got to be careful.
It's I just try to be a good human being. I think even, somebody gets excited about something, and even if they have slip, they say something that maybe wasn't the right way or whatever, like that's the thing. Like if you have goodwill towards them and they're a good person, and they know this isn't a common thing for them, then I think it's just not a big deal. But that's the that's the problem, kind of the environment we're in, is sometimes people are just looking for that opportunity to screenshot something and, oh, James said this, and now it's never going to go away. Um,
And let's take it out of context in the worst way possible.
that's the big thing too. Um, so I don't know much how I think if people have questions about it or scenarios, but I also kind of feel like we're moving through, so much of that general social media. I feel like we're going away from. Like I don't use Twitter anymore. I don't get on Facebook. Most of my interactions now are on smaller groups through Discord, which I'm sort of like fundamentally opposed to that, because it's very difficult to find a community on Discord unless you come to it from something else, like our podcast or a writers group or a magazine you like. But that's kind of the place where you can actually figure out who people are, if you trust them or not, and have a conversation that actually, kind of matters in that way. Otherwise, everything just feels sort of generic and shallow, and I really don't have time for that. So
Yeah, and nothing is greater than writing like 3 paragraphs about something really important, and then having some rando come on and call you a Nazi.
right.
You know, and you're just like, wow, okay, that's basically the essence of social media. My wife, who's Hispanic, once posted something, and the instant reply was, "Well, we found the Nazi," and I'm just like, do you even know what that means? And it's the base reaction of just about everybody is to call so many names on social media anymore, that it's just like I don't actually look at my replies anymore on Facebook when I post stuff. I'll post something about my books or about science or about some interesting discovery, and I just don't look at the posts anymore, because there's always somebody who wants to come in and argue with me, and I don't want to argue. I'm
Well,
not interested in arguing.
the incentive is engagement, not conversation or understanding. So that's why
Yeah,
that
yeah.
gets more. Calling somebody names or getting somebody angry is what the platform's designed to do.
But you know what that doesn't do? It
What's that?
doesn't sell books.
Right, exactly.
If you get people angry and you get people engaged with your story or your platform or whatever, and you get a bunch of like a tweet that goes viral about the plight of the dodo bird, that doesn't sell books. You might get a lot of followers. You might be like that one lady with 37,000 followers, or Cyborg with 75,000 followers. those don't translate into sales. You know, if you have 100 followers and you get 50 sales when you post, that is amazing.
Right.
If you have 100 followers and you get no sales when you post, those aren't followers. They're just people who clicked on the follow button because they liked one thing that you said and never saw anything else you ever said ever again. So cultivate actual followers, and you do that by being authentic and professional and sticking to subjects like your book or things related to your book. You know, if you go off on a tangent or if you have a bunch of other stuff you want to say and do, that's fine. I mean, do that. But just know that you don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to be like that online and sell books. You know, and just because you can point at other people who do, you're not them. You know, you're just not them.
And even if you could drill down on like, well, he did X, Y, and Z, and that's what created that. Well, it's hard to know what that secret sauce is that was the fourth thing that created that, turned engagement into sales. So
Yeah, absolutely. And with that note,
I know. Hi, baby.
we gotta call it.
All right.
So, be professional, be kind, be a good human being online. Remember what you say and do online reflects on your author, on your career as an author. So if you would be embarrassed for one of your readers to find out something you said online or posted online, maybe don't do it. If you are incapable of being embarrassed, well, find another way to sell books. All right, folks.
Yeah,
Take
thanks for
care.
hanging out with us. We'll see y'all later.